You're listening to Keeping Up with the Knights, a podcast for the faculty and staff at Steele High School, allowing them to connect outside of the classroom. Teacher, coach, mentor, and speaker Michael Herrera, a past District Teacher of the Year, will sit down with fellow teachers and bring their stories to life. Sit back, relax, and enjoy these stories as they unfold on this episode of Keeping Up with the Knights.
Welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up with the Knights. I get to have the privilege of sitting down with my neighbor down the Q hallway, Miss Katharine Barden. So thank you for taking some time out today to meet with me.
No problem.
Oh, you sound so enthusiastic.
Yes, I love watching these, but it's one of those, I'm like, oh, I didn't want to, well, I mean, it's like, I didn't know I was going to be on one, but I enjoy watching them.
Yeah. Well, you know, the thing is that when I talk to people, sometimes they're always like, oh, yeah, I listen to it. I'm like, oh, so when are you going to do? Oh, no, I'm not doing that. I'm just like, yes, you are. The whole goal for me is to reach everybody on this campus at some point. You know, it's not going to be this year, but it's going to be over the years. And so if I'm continuing to stay here at Steele High School, then all I have to do is interview the new teachers every year. And that's it. And that's all I have to add to the podcast. But now I've got to build up my my resume with all of these lovely podcast interviews. So, oh yeah, you got to love the queuing lights.
Yes. I normally don't leave them on. So.
Oh, no, it's okay. Even if you just have the light in the background, your little lamp would have been perfect.
Well, when I tried it out and I was like, I don't like if I'm going to do this, I want it to look better.
Yep. All right. So at the beginning of every podcast, I always start off by asking 5 get to know you type questions. So these are just like really short questions that you should be able to answer rather quickly. So, and then when I'm done, if you'll shoot 5 back at me, and then we'll jump into the podcast. Sound good?
Yep.
All right. So the first question is typically always the same. I always ask my guests, if you were to go back in time and high five yourself for something that you did, what would you go back and high five yourself for?
I've watched all of these episodes, so you'd think I would like know exactly what I was going to say, but they're really hard. They're really good questions. So at this moment, when you ask me that, I think it would be right after I graduated with my master's. We had moved up here in June. I graduated in December, and I got a job as an adjunct lecturer at San Antonio College in March. And so everything just happened really quickly. But now I look back and I was like, hey, that was pretty cool. I wasn't even 30, and I was I got a job teaching at the college level. So that was pretty neat. At the time, I was just happy to be working. But now looking back on it, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
There you go. Right. High five yourself or pat yourself on the back. All right. So what genre of music best describes you?
Oh, Americana music, like 92.1, KMBT New Braunfels. That's like, I love all of that on there.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Number 3, do you collect anything? So if I walk into your house, is going to be something apparent that you collect?
Yes. So my husband calls me an old lady because I have several collections.
Okay.
So my grandparents traveled a lot until they just couldn't anymore. And so they'd always bring all the grandchildren back something, a little souvenir. So they kind of started collections for us. So I have all of these thimbles, and they're kind of a thing. You see the spoons and the thimbles and shot glasses everywhere you go. So my brother had spoons. I don't remember what my sister had, but I had thimbles. And so I have thimbles, and I haven't really bought any, but I have lots from other people bringing them to me because they see that I have them. And so they're kind of cool. So I have a little display case for those. And then something that I collect that's my thing is antique Whataburger mugs, the nickel mugs. They're glass. It's kind of like a beige color. And my uncle, he drank coffee at Whataburger every morning with his friends at 6 a.m. He was a lifelong bachelor. And when he passed away, he had like 4 of them at his house. And so nobody else wanted them. So I took them. And every now and then I see one like at an antique store or somewhere, and they're not expensive. Like they're not worth a ton.
Right.
And so I'll pick them up. So it's kind of cool though, when people come over, they're like, this is cool. They have, or maybe their grandparents had one or something.
Yeah.
So I have about 7 or 8 of those, and those are pretty neat. So that's the thing that I enjoy. So thimbles and Whataburger mugs.
I got you. All right. That's good to know. All right. Question number 4. If you could play the role of any movie star or character, who would you be and why?
Man, that's a good one.
So it can be real life or it can be cartoon. It can be any kind of character or actor or actress. What would you do? Who would you be?
So, that's a good one. I think I'm gonna have to go back like in high school. Like I wanted, like, she was like, just really big fan. I even had a poster in my room of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Not the movie, the TV show with Sarah Michelle Gellar. The movie to me is, I mean, the show is cheesy too, but I was always a big fan of the show. So much so that like I've rewatched it so many times. I really enjoy that series.
All right. All right. Question number 5. If you were not a teacher, what would you be doing?
So I always tell my own children and then my kids here at school, in my next life or my next job or something, or I should have been this, I should have done this. So, and maybe one day I will, I don't know. I wanted to be a librarian, but I thought that would be boring, but I was dumb. I should have been a librarian. And I love like what Miss Everett does. I'm like, that's the kind of librarian I would have been.
Yeah.
But I've also, now that what I've done and what I've learned that I'm good at, I think, and it's not something I would have ever considered before, but being an editor for like a newspaper or a magazine, I think I would be really good at that. So maybe in my future that will be there. I don't know.
Very good. My wife has mentioned being a librarian too, but of course she would have to go back to school and get her master's.
Yes.
And so that kind of shot that down pretty quick. But all right. Well, I think those are my 5 questions. It's your turn. Shoot away.
All right. If you were given $1 million to donate to a cause or causes, who would you give it to?
Anything that had to do with autoimmune disorders. My yaya, which is Greek for grandmother, she died from multiple sclerosis. My mother, who recently passed, also, she didn't pass because of, but she had a whole bunch of different autoimmune disorders. I've also inherited some of those myself, and I've got like 2 or 3 different autoimmune disorders. So I'd have to really look, but I think the umbrella autoimmune disorder is MS. So it'd have to be either MS or something associated with an autoimmune disorder.
Yeah. Okay. Where or what do you see yourself doing in 5 years? Like, where do you see yourself? What do you see yourself doing?
All right. Well, my current aspirations, and this is no secret, I aspire to be a head basketball coach. And I've been here for 15 years, had a lot of great successes here at Steele High School. But my journey as a basketball coach, not a teacher, but as a basketball coach, is to take me to the next level and have my own program. So in 5 years, I would hope to say it'd be nice if it were here, but Lonnie Hubbard's not going to retire anytime soon. So he's a lifer. He can probably retire and I don't know, soon, and probably still stay here for 10 or 15 more years. So it's like, if he retires, I'm probably going to retire with him and never be a head coach. So in 5 years, I really hope to professionally keep doing what I'm doing as a health science teacher, but be a head coach somewhere. So I would be starting a new program or joining a new high school in that capacity.
Well, we are building a 3rd high school, so.
I know. Well, who knows when that'll ever happen?
I know. Yeah. And that's why I'm like, so they say.
Yeah, right.
So this one is just a question that I had I know we've kind of talked about this, but it's a little bit different. So, but if you had to tattoo a message on yourself, on your arm, your forearm, what would you write? Like, what would your message to yourself be?
That's tough because I already have one.
I know.
I've got
so
6.
What would be your second one?
I've got 6 Bible verses tattooed on my back. I've got a wrist tattoo of a meaning, for me too. But if I were to tattoo a message, man, Anybody who has a tattoo knows that you've got to put a lot of thought into them, right? Because you can't just like stamp something on your arm that doesn't have meaning. So what meaningful message would I want to tattoo on my body somewhere? All right, one word: believe. Believe is a word that my mom used to use a lot. My brother, prior to me ever doing this podcast, did a interview with my mom, and she talked about that in her interview with my brother as well, about just believing. So maybe it's just simply the word believe. And you can take that anywhere, right? You can absolutely use that anywhere in your life, and it's so general that you could apply it anywhere. So maybe it's just a one-word phrase.
Yeah. No, that's great. Would you want to be president of the United States?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Not that I would. I'm not politically savvy, but in the past decade, I have brushed up, and people have given me advice before, and either I was too young or naive to understand. I've had professors in my past tell me, this was a long time ago, that I should be in sales, and I was like, what are you talking about? And he would always say, because you could sell ice to an Eskimo. I never heard that expression before. I'm 18, 19, 20 years old in college, hearing this piece of advice, and I just laugh like, ha ha ha, that's funny. I didn't ever really understand, but this is a professor. I went to a really small university. University of Tulsa was only 4,200 students. And so your professors really well, and you most likely went from your freshman year to your senior year with the same students for 4 years. So everyone knows each other. And so he knew me really well. And what he was always telling me is, even with his podcast, communication. I can talk to people. I can relate to people. And so lo and behold, like after I got done with my master's, I was a personal trainer. I was a massage therapist. I sold Advocare, and it came naturally. I did like $8,000 of sales in my first 2 weeks working with Advocare. And it was like,
Wow.
That's when it clicked. I'm like, okay, like I got this, right? So it's just one of those things where listening to people giving me advice, hearing what they had to say. But I did say two. Who was the other one? Ask me your question again so it can come back to me.
Would you want to be president of the U.S.?
Okay, so the other person was my cousin, and he said, Michael, in your future, you're going to be like a city councilman or something like that. And it never like really ever dawned on me, but I just have a heart for change. I have a heart for advocacy, like advocating for something that you believe in. So maybe not president of the United States, but maybe somewhere in my future, there might be some role just in politics, maybe somewhere where I can advocate for people and giving people a voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. My last question came to me just seventh period. One of my students was showing me, we talk a lot about current events. And I love it because something I'll say, they'll see a snippet of it and they're like, oh, my teacher was talking about that. And so they'll read it and they continue. And so one of my students, and I guess this current event isn't that it's not really school related, but it was about the guy who got onto the field during the Super Bowl game. And we were listening to a funny commentary about it on Monday. And she showed me that he made $375,000 off of, that's why he did it. And so my fifth question is, for $375, would you, and he wasn't quite streaking. I mean, he was wearing a pink leotard.
Yeah.
Would you wear a pink leotard for $375,000 and run through the Super Bowl?
$375,000.
I know. I was like, that's a lot of money.
So my answer is going to be yes. Because in a way, it's like winning the lottery. And ultimately, if I can pay off my mortgage,
right,
my wife gets to stay home. She's happier. Wife happy, mama happy, life happy.
Yeah.
If all that, I mean, like, so like the repercussions, okay, do I get arrested?
Well, and he did. And the article, it said he spent one night in jail. paid $500 on bond. So he'll go, and even if he gets a $50,000 fine, you're still looking at $325. So I was like, hey, that's not too bad.
So, okay. So in my current profession, I'm a teacher and a coach.
Right.
What would that do to me? I might
Yeah.
lose my job. So that's where it's like,
Yeah.
if I do it, I can pay off my mortgage, but then I have to look for a new job. So it's like
Sell Advocare. You'll be able to be Advocare.
It's maybe I'm selling cars or something. I don't know. It's a toss up, man. So I'm going to answer with a yes and a no. But here's the funny story about this. When I smiled because the person who did it, I found out, went to high school with the person. I believe he's here. I don't remember the guy at all, but so I graduated high school in 1998. Cliff Kingsbury was the coach at he was the quarterback at New Braunfels High School. We were playing against them. We went into 4 overtimes with them. New Braunfels ended up beating us, but he streaked that game too.
Oh my gosh.
So when we later on tonight, if I can find it, I'm going to forward it to you on Facebook.
Yeah.
Because a bunch of my friends were talking about it on social media, on Facebook. And they're like, yeah, that's so-and-so. Remember, he streaked the game. He went so I believe he went to MacArthur High School in San Antonio. Yeah. Like small world, right?
If you could find that footage, you could probably sell it and make some money.
Oh, with him at the New Braunfels game?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna find that. I'm gonna send it to you.
That's
a
small world.
Yep.
Wow. That's interesting.
All right. So those are your 5?
Yep.
All right, so let's go ahead and move into more of the interview, the podcast kind of questions here. So I always like to start off by just simply asking, talk to us a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, what your family life was like growing up as a kid, and share some of those memories. Again, because the podcast purpose is really just to connect us outside of the classroom. There'll be some questions here about education, but some of these questions are really just, who is Katharine Barden? How do we get to know you a little bit more? So go ahead and share a little bit about your childhood and your upbringing.
So I am from Bishop, Texas, which is about 45 minutes south of Corpus Christi. It's on the way to the valley on 77. The town has 3,000 people in it. And I lived there there's a town next to it, Kingsville. So my parents, because back then you had to go to school where you lived. There was no school choice like we have now. So my parents wanted us to go to a smaller school. So they moved from Kingsville to Bishop, but I moved there before I was 4. And so I lived there from 4 to 18 in Bishop, Texas. And my mom was a teacher there. Little bitty, we were 3A, but by like 1 student. We were really we would be considered a 2A now.
Right.
So I knew the first, middle, and last name of every single person from 3rd grade through 12th grade. Hardly anyone ever moved away or moved in. So if they did move in, you were super interesting for a while.
Yeah.
And I knew where everybody lived. And when I first came to Steele, I remember thinking my entire town, population-wise, could fit in this school.
Yep.
Now I'm like, it's not that big, but I remember, so I understand when students come here and they're like, oh my gosh, people say it's so big. I remember thinking that. Now I'm like, yeah, there's 3,000 people here, but somehow I still see the same people all the time.
Right. So you said something interesting. You said your mom was a teacher. So how long did she teach for, and what did she teach?
So my mom retired from teaching. She started teaching at 23. She was a theater. I just listened to our new theater teacher's interview just a few days ago, and I was like, wow, reminds me so much of my mom. My mom was a theater teacher, theater major, and they recommended at UT at that time, which I guess they kind of still do, because she said she had an English minor as well. So my mom did theater for years and years and years. I used to go with her on the bus for a week. Back then you could take your kids with you on the bus. She drove the bus, and on weekends I go with her to speech and debate meets. And then once my brother, sister, and I are all very close in age. Once she had my sister, it was just hard being gone all the time. As a coach, it's hard. So she started teaching English. And so I guess she taught English for 18 years. So the last chunk of her career before she retired. So.
Okay. Any other educators in your family?
Yes, actually. So my Mimi, my grandmother, she's 96, she's still alive. She was also a teacher, so third generation teacher. It's not, and something I noticed in a lot of these videos is most of us didn't start off thinking we would be teachers. And
Yep.
and I did get my teaching degree, but it was well, that'll be a fallback. I'll
Right.
just have it in case I need it, right? And so, but here I am and I love what I do. So
It's so interesting to even talk about that because, they professions, they pull on your heartstrings, right? We talk to kids and, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they've got, my kids, I want to be a nurse and I want to be this and I want to be that. Um, and it's interesting to know where people are pulled, but it's people like us teachers that have to bring it out of them and what's the word I'm looking for? Solidify, for lack of better terms, like solidify that for them to let them know, yes, it's okay, like go for that.
mhm.
But for me, I always wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a team physician in the NBA. But deep down inside, like I loved basketball so much, I knew I wanted to coach basketball. Just never really crossed my mind as an early age that I would become a teacher. Never did I ever think that I was going to do that. But I think if your heart is right, you're always going to end up following it. Well,
Yeah.
hopefully you do, right? And it pulls you back to education. And I go back to what I told you about, you can sell ice to an Eskimo. In a weird way, like education is still the same thing because I have to sell to these kids that it's fun to learn. I have to sell the idea that they can become nurses and doctors. I have to sell the idea of the way I want to manage my classroom is a way that they can abide by, and we're selling something. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
we're exuding some kind of um sales pitch, if
Yeah.
you will. And I think the effective teachers sell it really well. Um, and I think the teachers that maybe are not so effective with connecting with students might be selling the wrong thing.
Yeah.
We have to be able to hybrid teach. We have to be able to hybrid our content. We have to hybrid that with reality. We have to hybrid that with technology and hybrid that with connections from high school to real world. Um, and if I think we miss one of those pieces, then we're only selling one thing, and that can turn kids off.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I totally agree. They have to be able to buy into it. Like, why do I need this? Why should I pay
yep,
attention? Yeah, why should I give you 45 minutes of my time? Yeah, so yeah, and I agree. It's our job to get them to buy in. So
yep. And it's a sales pitch, and your approach. Like, all right, so a little side tangent here. I feel like I'm an effective classroom manager. I manage my classroom really well. I'm not saying it's the right way, but it's my way. And I know how to reach my kids in my classroom. I can give one assignment in my classroom, and another teacher can give the same assignment in another classroom. I can, and I'm just hypothetically using this as an example, I can get my kids to turn it in, and this teacher over here can't get them to turn it in.
yeah,
How is that? Well, to me, it was a sales pitch. Like, how much did you engage the kids on the lesson and what the purpose was, and how did you relate it to the real world? And you know what I mean? Like, and so like that's that introspective look you in the mirror. Why am I not getting kids to turn in stuff? Why am I not? Why am I not? Why am I not? And the answer lies within you. Like, why are you not? But
yeah.
some people just point the finger. It's the kid. It's the kid. It's the kid. It's the kid. But I
And
really,
and I would like to say to that sometimes because I have those conversations or I hear some people, not a lot of people, but say that. And sometimes I say it and sometimes I think it depending on who I'm talking to. But my answer to that is, yeah, okay. So it's the kid. It's still your job to reach them. Like
that's
it doesn't
right.
matter if it's all the kid's fault.
That's right.
You'll have to do the work.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. All right. So growing up, you said Bishop, right?
mhm.
Bishop, Texas. Did you go like high school? Where were you in high school?
So we're in Bishop, the entire
Okay.
school.
Oh, you
minus
said K through 12.
Yeah, so it's all
Okay.
on one block. I mean, it's actually 3 blocks, but it's all together.
I
Like
got
you
you.
can walk from 3rd grade to 12th grade. Because like at the in elementary, I would walk down all the way down to the high school where my mom was.
Yeah.
I went to a parochial school pre-K through second grade.
Okay.
But it was in Bishop, really close by. So they do have the primary though of where I went to school. Across town is like 5 minutes, but yeah. So third grade through 12th grade to this day is all on one. Even though they did expand a little bit, it's still all on one street.
I gotcha.
So yeah, K through 12 there, and for all of its maybe limitations, but at the time we didn't know they were limitations. I had a great school formative years, so I wouldn't trade it. I mean, I had a great education, so, but it's definitely different than here.
So where did life take you after that?
So I applied, like I was like, I want to get out of this town. I want to go away. I had left Texas, but only to go to New Mexico. I had never flown on a plane. I wanted to get out of South Texas. Got accepted to UTSA and Texas State, but my parents said, they won't watch this, so I can tell them. They said, we can help you out more if you stay local. Texas A&M Kingsville is right there. So why don't you go there a year or two? And my dad had graduated from A&I, which is Texas A&M Kingsville. My mom had done her master's there. My Mimi, who is a teacher, she had gone to school there, and it's a great university, but I was like, I want to go away. Everybody's going there. I want to go somewhere else. But I mean, money talks. I mean, hey, college is expensive. So I went there, and the plan was always for me to leave, and that's why I tell the kids, like, go where you want to go, because I could have transferred out, and I ended up loving TAMUK. Things happen the way they're supposed to, but I got involved in like student government, and I was in clubs and organizations. And so then it just like I tell the kids, it's not that you can't transfer out. You just kind of like your life starts to be a part of that, and you don't want to leave. So I was like, go where you want to go. You can always come back. So go where you want to go.
So we share that kind of in common. That's precisely why I went to the University of Tulsa. I felt, I mean, I was in the popular group, if you will, the athletes and just the core group of kids of my senior class or freshman through senior class. And, a lot of them went to A&M, and I loved A&M, and I still do. I mean, that's a great place. But man, even as a 18-year-old high school kid, I was like, not that I was a bad kid. I was a good kid, good grades, academically sound and involved in everything. It's like, what great opportunity would this be to go to a place where no one knows me? Mm-hmm. I get to make all new friends. I could reinvent myself if I wanted to, because they wouldn't know the difference, because they're meeting me for the first time. I wanted a small school, and that's why I went to the University of Tulsa. And then once it came back to my master's and thinking of places to go, I was like, all right, let me go try out A&M. And I went there, looked at Texas Tech, and I looked at UT, but Texas Tech offered me a lot of money and A&M didn't. So yeah. I went to Texas Tech, and thank God I did, because that's where I met my wife. So, I agree with the advice of, and I always tell the kids this. I said, I'm not your parent, so I'm allowed to tell you this.
Yeah.
Go where you want to go to school.
Yeah.
Your parents are your parents. And if they're going to pay 100% of your college education, well, then you go where they say, because you don't want to end up with the debt and all that kind of stuff. And I said, however, if you choose to still go to another school and have debt, let me show you how to pay for it. Yeah. And that's when I do a lot of my budgeting lessons on, if you get a degree in medicine, if you become a doctor, this is how much salary you're going to make. And this is how fast you can pay off your student loans, so I go that route. But I agree with you. I really feel like kids should go where they want to go, because ultimately, I don't know the percentage. I'd be making it up if I said it. They come home.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell them home will always be there, and it's totally fine to go home, but leave. You can always come back.
That's right. Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about your journey. Went to college, and then you decided to become a teacher. So talk about the journey of realizing you wanted to become a teacher to maybe your student teaching, and then actually what led you up to becoming a teacher at Steele High School.
So I started off with a business major, because I'd gotten into the business school at UTSA and Texas State. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll just start at TAMUK and I'll transfer out. Never did. But so I started off with a business major, but I took my first history course, and I'd always been in AP classes and pre-AP classes since sixth grade. And I'd always done well in history and government, but it wasn't anything I'd ever thought about like majoring in. But I took my first history course, with Dr. Tuller, who, like you were saying, the University of Tulsa, I think there's about 6,000 students at TAMUK. So you get to know your professors really well. They become your mentors. Right. I'm still in touch with several of them. Like you were saying, like once you get with that cohort, you're kind of together, which was great. That's why I'm like, hey, y'all, don't knock those smaller schools. Like, especially like if you want those smaller class sizes, you want that mentorship, that's where it is. I've had one of my last classes as an undergraduate. There were 2 students. It was a seminar, but I mean, hey, and that was great. I mean, I was really getting my money there. Like when you're getting a one-on-one with the teacher, with the professor. So that was pretty neat. Anyway, I took my first history course, and he was such a great teacher. And I loved how Dr. Tuller told history as a story. And that's what I try to do. I try to, like you were saying, you got to sell it. Like he sold history, and I already liked history, but I just loved it. And I found myself working hard because I wanted to prove, I mean, his class was hard, but I wanted to do well. And I found myself working the hardest for his class, not because I had to. I could have just been okay, but because I wanted to. I really enjoyed it. And so I ended up getting an A in that class, and which I think out of all of the students in there, I think, because later on he told me only 2 students got an A in that class, and you were one of them. And so I just really loved it. So I changed my major to history. And so my mom said, well, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to teach? And I was like, no, I want to work at the State Department. I had these lofty ideas, and I was like, but I have to pick a minor. So I'll just pick social studies and education. So I got so at TAMUK, so you can do history with teaching certification with social studies. So you kind of like, you major in history, but you get your minor in education and social studies. So you do the traditional education stuff. So I was like, that'll be my fallback. Well, I never made it to the State Department, so I guess that's the fallback. I don't know.
Right.
So, and then, so I did student teaching in Kingsville with an 8th grade U.S. history teacher. Learned a lot from him. Tanner, his last name was Tanner. He's a sales book rep for history books now. We're still in touch. So he was fantastic. He had come into teaching as a second career, and he really saw it as giving back. And he was the kind of teacher who would show up at your house on weekends to talk to your parents because they're not answering the phone, giving haircuts to kids, like boys, like before school started, who like couldn't afford to go get a haircut because they were really strict on dress code at that school as a junior high. They had to wear uniforms. Their hair had to be cut a certain way. And he was the one. Your first year or your first semester of student teaching, it's really just observation. So you go like 3 days a week for like 3 or 4 hours, and you do teach 1 or 2 lessons, but you're really just there observing, like filling out reports, keeping a journal. And at the time I was like, oh my gosh, this is so like, I'm in college keeping a journal, but there's a method, there's a purpose to the method. And I would watch him like call someone over, like, hey, why aren't you turning in your work? Like quietly conferencing with them, just mentoring them, or why are you getting in trouble for this? Oh, you don't have money for a haircut? You know, I'm here every Monday morning. Just come in. Like, you want me to come to your house? You want me to come to your house? You know, I'll come to your house. And they're like, no, don't come to my house. And I really was impressed by that. And he was the kind of like, he was the person that really showed me like, it's your job to like get into their face, and not in a bad way, but like, if they need it, you get into their face, you call them over, you mentor them. And I really liked that. And so I learned a lot from him. And then my second semester of student teaching, you do it, well, at least at TAMUK, you do it 2 days a week, but for like 5 or 6 hours, and you're teaching, like not every lesson, but you're doing a lot more. And I was very lucky. I had really good people to learn from. And so that was at Banquetti High School, which is even smaller school than Bishop. It's a little bitty town in the middle of nowhere, about 30 minutes from Kingsville, farming, ranching community. And so those kids were, and in Kingsville too, there's definitely, it's Title I school now, and Banquetti was as well then. And so I had never seen a school, I had never been in a Title I school. And I remember the first day I was there, everybody goes to breakfast after second period. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And I thought that was my first experience with that. Everybody goes to breakfast, and they do it after second period to make sure that everyone's there at school. And so I was like, okay, we're monitoring. And she was like, yeah, and you can get some, like, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I didn't bring any cash today. And she was like, no, everyone eats here for free, even teachers. So I thought that was the greatest thing ever. Like everybody, like, it just took 20 minutes, had breakfast together, and then later on I found out like what Title I is, but I thought it was the greatest thing. I was like, this is awesome.
Man, that's a whole nother story, because what an amazing idea and concept. Title
Yeah,
I
and it was
or
small.
not.
Yeah, you could fit the whole, I mean, it was even smaller than my town. So, I mean, at Steele, it would be just trying to logistically do that. I understand the difference, but I really, I liked it. It was really nice. And it's a way for the kids to get up, moving, talking, wake up, and just make sure that they're getting something to eat. And even for teachers, it was nice. And so she was great. She was a really good teacher too. And also a lot of kids there were definitely, I mean, there's Title I. So I learned from her how to have a lot of grace. Like, and she was a really good teacher. So that was world history and US history. So I got to do that. And then my final student teaching, I had a terrible teacher, but I learned what kind of teacher I did not want to be.
Absolutely.
So they paired me up. They said, okay, you've done, because social studies is everything from 8th through 12th, US history, world history, geography, government economics, psychology, sociology. So they were like, you need to experience a lot of it. It's not just one thing. So they were like, we need to pair you up with a government economics teacher. So they found one, and he told me flat out, first day I was there. And at that point, you're there 5 days a week from first period through 8th period, lesson planning, you're teaching. You're doing everything. I will say, if any student teachers watch this, y'all have it way easier than we did. Like they don't have to do as much as we did. But anyway, he told me the first day, I only did this for the money. And so, cause my school paid them to like have us, cause I guess we're a burden or whatever. And I'm like, hey, so he's getting paid. He doesn't have to do anything. Like, and he would sit there and look up. He played pool, like pool cube, like, and so I was like, oh my gosh. But I quickly learned what kind of teacher I did not want to be, because he was totally checked out. He was like, I'm like 8 years from retirement. I'm just cruising.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you still have 8 years. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And I truly believe, like, once you get to that point, get out, go do something else.
Yeah.
Go do something else. You're not doing yourself or any of these kids any favors. And so I did learn a lot there. I learned, like I said, what kind of teacher I did not want to be. And so I was so happy when I was done with that. The kids were fine. It was just, and he was like, here's some worksheets. That's what I do. And I was like, oh, this is not how I've been taught to teach. Like, like, no. And then when I told my liaison later on, they ask you your opinion to like feedback on them. And I just said, hey, I wouldn't maybe place anyone else with him. And she was like, well, why not? Did something happen? I was like, oh, he really wasn't in it. He didn't provide any mentorship like my other teachers. And I had such great people the first 2 times. So I had heard other people complain. So I was like, I guess I was due for my dud. And she was like, I really wish you would have told me. We would have placed you with someone else. That's not what you're supposed to experience.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, well, I'm done. So whatever.
Yeah. You just put yourself in a situation, and like, you don't really want to say much, you know?
Yeah. I was
like,
I
place
didn't know I had a choice.
You know?
Yeah.
So, all right. So you finished up student teaching, and then.
So I graduated in December, and I graduated in 2009. And so in 2007, it's when a lot of teachers were getting laid off. There were budget cuts all across the state.
Yep.
Like nobody was getting hired. My friend, one of my best friends, she teaches at Davenport now, but she was teaching at San Marcos. She's an art teacher. So like that was just she had gotten a job right away, but then she got cut immediately. And so there were no jobs. And so I was like, well, I'm really good at school, so I guess I'll just keep going to school. So I started my master's.
Yeah.
And I was working part-time jobs at the Navy base there in Kingsville. But I applied for a couple of full-time positions, but didn't get them. So I started graduate school because I was like,
right, what else am I gonna do?
Yeah, what else am I gonna do? So I was working at the base, and I did several jobs at the base. And one of them was a lifeguard and a lifeguard instructor. And I worked at the gym. I was a gym attendant. But I also taught CPR, first aid classes and stuff like that. And so private school outside of Kingsville. It's a boarding school, parochial, college prep boarding school. They called and they were like, hey, we need a lifeguard instructor to come out because they have a pool. Would you do it? And they were going to pay me pretty well. So I was like, oh yeah, sure. So I went out there just to see their pool, give them a quote of what it would cost for me to train lifeguards and do a lifeguard class out there. And so I showed up after work at the base. And so I'd been at the pool all day, did not look, I mean, I was like, I'm here to teach a lifeguarding class. So I've got a shirt and shorts on over my swimsuit, but flip-flops. I'm sunburned, sunglasses, hat, so I'm like, oh, this is a school. I didn't know it was here. And so I jokingly was like, do you have any positions open? Like, I'm actually a teacher. And I passed all my certification tests. And she was like, actually, yes. What are you certified in? And I told her, and she was like, okay. And so I didn't realize it at the time. This was 2023, but she was interviewing me as we're walking to the pool and looking back on it. And I'm just like, oh my God, I looked like crap, but yeah. But so I mean, I was there to teach lifeguarding class, not for an interview, but I'm like, I would never have worn that if I had known. And so she was like, she really didn't, she was asking me questions. Later on, I realized, oh, she was interviewing me, but she just said, hey, just send me your resume, not fill out an application, just send me your resume. And I ended up teaching the course there. And then I went to Africa with a political science course for a 2-week intensive course that summer. And I'd applied like at 50 places all over the state of Texas, trying to get a teaching job. It's 2010. By this point, nobody's hiring still, especially they're like, what can you coach? And I'm like, swimming, but they're like, no. So I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to keep going to graduate school and working at the base. And I got an email from the principal there, and she was like, we would love to have you come and teach. And I was like, well, I got no other options, so I guess that's where I'm going. But it ended up being the best first teaching job ever. I learned so much there. The students were amazing, and I had great coworkers. So I always feel like things work out the way they're supposed to, some way, shape, or form. So I taught there for 4 years, and then my husband got transferred to San Antonio with his work. And so I took some time off with my graduate work since I was teaching full time, and I kept working at the base at the time, just because, private schools do not pay more. And so I was like, I'm working too much. I can't go to graduate school. But by the time we transferred up here, I finished up graduate school that semester, and then started working at San Antonio College. So.
And that was what year?
Hold on. Let me think. 2015, because I graduated in December 14 with my master's, and I got that job in the spring of 2015, and I taught for them for a whole year. And then I had my youngest, and so I stayed home for a year with her. And then I applied here at Steele for a social studies position, and I get a phone call saying, we'd like to have you come in. But Jeremy tricked me because I was not called in for a social studies position. It was for an English position. But so going back to the parochial school, it's a small school. So most people teach, kind of like our theater teacher. She was saying she got a computer science. They said, I was teaching geography, and they were like, hey, we think you'd be really good at English. We have an English opening. Would you be interested in teaching both? And I was like, yeah, my mom was an English teacher. I'm a really good writer, and I have to read a lot of history. I'll take the test. Took the test, passed it, no problem. And so I did teach English there. And then so when I get to Steele, I was so excited. And then they're like, oh no, you're here for English. And then basically, but I wanted to work here really badly. And so I was like, I'll take whatever you got. Because I was like, I want to be at Steele. As soon as I met Jan, I was like, she is the kind of principal that you just want to work for. So, and I lived in the district at the time. I was like, this is where I want to be. And I went home and I told my husband, like, oh my God, please call. Cause I had interviewed at another school in a local school district, year here the same morning. And I just got the worst vibe and feel from the school, just walking into the school and from the two people I interviewed with. And then I come to Steele not an hour later and totally different. And I was like, I'm going to take whoever offers me a job, but oh my gosh, I just got to be at Steele. And they did. Jana called me later on, and I've been so thankful to be here. And again, things work out the way they're supposed to. So,
and what year is this for you here?
This is my 4th year.
Fourth year. Okay.
Yeah.
So next year will be year 5, but you're about to complete year 4.
Yes.
All right.
I just realized,
go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just realized that I've interviewed I interviewed at San Antonio College, but my interview here at Steele. So I guess my teaching interviews have always been a little bit interesting because I had scheduled 2 interviews on one day thinking that was smart. And I put plenty of time between the 2. And one of the things about that first interview that really put me off was I arrived early. So to me, if you're on time, you're late. And they were like, the principal said, well, I didn't have her down until this time, so she can wait. And then she made me wait even longer than the time she had me down for. And then there was a really bad truck accident. And so I showed up late for my interview here at Steele. So I was sure, because I was like, man, I would hold that against anyone I was interviewing.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have any way to get in contact with Jeremy. So I look up his email, like I'm Googling Steele High School, Jeremy Matthews. And I find his email and I email him and he responded. And when I got here, he was like, you passed the first test. There really was an accident. And I was like, oh, I would never lie about that. But people do. And I'm one of those people. I'll check. If you tell me I'm late of traffic, I'm like, liar. There's no traffic. Like, he checked. But I was so like, oh my gosh, I would hold that against somebody if they showed up for an interview. But I somehow wowed them.
That's crazy. Well, let's all right. So the next question I have for you is, why do you teach? Why did you become a teacher? And why do you currently, you know what I'm saying? Like, what's your why?
So there were a few teachers. Well, I had several teachers throughout formative years and college that they just encouraged me in ways that I really needed. And I want to be that person for the kid who needs it. And I think that that's one reason. The other reason is I love how, like I said, Dr. Tuller, and I have another professor of political science that's my mentor, Dr. Goswami. I love how they teach. And I think that how they teach and what they teach and history and political science and all of it is just, those critical thinking skills as well are just so important. And I don't know, not everyone teaches it, and that's just my opinion. And I'm not saying I'm the best at it, because I know I'm not. I think it's important to have those teachers who can teach things well. And I feel like I do it well. I know I'm not the best, but I do it well. And so I just want to be that teacher for them. And then I just think I can give it to them the information to them a little bit better than maybe some others.
Right. I got you.
Not everyone. There are some really good teachers I have met that I bow down to.
What is your definition of success in the classroom?
When the kids are paying it, like, so that buy-in, like, right, they're awake, they're not sleeping, they're paying attention. I've got their attention. Like you were saying, you give an assignment and you're getting that work back, but someone else isn't. I've had a couple of teachers several times say, like, how are you getting this kid to turn in work? Do they really have that average in your class? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, how? And I'm like, I just talk to the kid, like, or you make a deal or whatever it is. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. You just, so I think just getting them to buy in, having them engaged. I think and then sometimes I don't think we see that success for a long time, and because they don't realize until later on, like, oh, there was a reason why they did that. Right. And so I do appreciate when kids come back and say that, or they send you an email or a message or something, because I think sometimes, not that I'm looking for that, but that they finally realize. So when they do well, do well. I had a student come in today. He's a senior now, and I had him as a sophomore, and he was like, I finally figured it out, Miss Barden. I know you didn't think I ever would, but I did. And I'm joining the Marine Corps. And I was like, I'm so proud of you. You know, like, that's success to me. Like, it took a little while, but you figured it out.
You know, one of the things, I'm reading a book right now. and I'll ask you this question. It's along the theme of Valentine's. How do you spell love? It's not a trick question, but how you spell
Okay.
love?
That's a
Love, right?
yeah,
But the
yeah,
way that the book talks about it is Time.
yeah, yeah,
You spell love with time, because the only way where you make that connection is by spending time. So when you say that you get a kid to turn in an assignment, or Miss Barden, like, is that grade really like the grade that they got? Because I can't get him or I can't get her to do this. Well, the teachers that can get the students to do the certain things probably spent some time with that kid somewhere, whether it was in the hall, whether it was side by side at their desk, not standing above them looking down at them, but like on your knees or sitting on a chair next to them, spending time with them to
yeah,
let them know that you actually care. Maybe it's a Zoom call with one of your kids that's remote, that you spend some time and have a conversation. Maybe it's the time where you send them a remind message. Hey, you haven't come to class the last 3 days. I'm just checking on you, making sure you're okay. Versus maybe the remind message, why haven't you turned in your work?
hmm
Hey, are you okay? I'm just checking on you, and those things go a long way. But when we give our kids time, the equivalent of that is love. And if kids know that we care about them, then they're going to reciprocate that in the fashion of maybe turning in an assignment. That doesn't mean they got an A on it, but it means that they're turning stuff in because they
yeah,
respect you as a teacher enough, whether they like your class or not, they respect you enough because you care about them,
yeah.
and that goes a long way.
Yeah, I always say that's when I've had student teachers, I'm like, just the fact that they're turning it in, that's 50% of the battle. Like
That's it.
I haven't even graded it and
Yep.
they're already halfway there. So I got something out of it.
Yep. All right, guys, I do apologize, but me and Ms. Barden had to take a little bit of a break, and we're continuing this episode on a different day. So that's why we might be wearing some different clothes. We might be looking different if you're watching, but if you're listening to us, we're going to jump right back into this episode of Keeping Up with the Knights. So, Ms. Barden, thank you again for taking a little bit of time in your day to finish up this episode. But my first question for you is, can you tell me a teacher in your past growing up, elementary, middle school, high school, or even college, that you will always remember, and what about them made them so special?
There are several, and I think it goes as well to, I was thinking about why I teach, and some of those people that really stand out, I want to be that person for students. I know I won't be that person for every student, but I hope that they have that teacher that just stands out to them. But I think the teacher that if I have to, number one out of the several that I can think of, Mr. Joe D. Trevino. He was my theater teacher all 4 years in high school, speech and debate theater, small school. So we did everything. My mom had already known him for years before I was born. So I'd known him even before high school. And he was a very strict without being strict.
Yep.
He didn't have any of his own children, but he was progressive without being progressive in our faces. Like the little things that he taught me over 4 years, and he would be very blunt when you messed up, but he never held a grudge. Like if you made him really angry, he let you know, and the next day it's a fresh day. And so I think I really liked that about him. I love that about him, and he definitely want to be that kind of teacher that inspires people. He passed away from cancer a few years ago, and they had to put his memorial in our school auditorium, and it was packed. And I remember thinking, and not just with students of and over like a 30-year career, so young and old, and to have that kind of like people showed up, like traveled hours to come to this memorial for him. And I thought that really said a lot about him. I think he impacted I know he did. And I remember my senior year, there was something he said, like, I fought my curly, big frizzy hair forever. And my senior year, he was like, it's really pretty, right? Like, it's nice hair. Stop fighting it. And I was like, really appreciated that because he would not lie to you. So, and the man had good taste. So if he was telling you that, he was being serious. And then he also said something to me as well. Like, I knew I was smart, but I guess they just assume like smart kids know they're smart. And I remember him saying, Katharine, you're very smart. You know that, right? You need to believe that about yourself. And it's just nice hearing it from someone that actually is not just saying it to say it.
Right. Yeah, man, those are some great qualities to have, having a teacher to to be able to compliment you, but be able to put you in your place, to obviously gain the respect of a class. And then you talked about, the memorial service for him. You always think about, it's kind of morbid to think about, but well, let me go two ways with this. The impact that we have the opportunity to have with kids is present. I mean, the amount of kids that we have coming in our classrooms every single day, that's an opportunity to impact every single one of those kids. But like you said, I may not reach that kid, but hopefully when that kid leaves my room and goes to your room, maybe they connect to you, and that's okay.
Yeah.
We don't have to connect to all kids, but I think it's our duty and our responsibility as an educator to at least see the opportunities to have the impact on these kids. And if we seek out those opportunities, we might strike out in my classroom, but that's where the next teacher comes along and hits it out of the ballpark, and so just kind of, I see in my head right now, I've got this like picture of that service being packed, but yet another teacher, just a random person, may not have anybody.
Right.
Not to talk about the family and whatnot, but the amount of impact, like what would yours, and that's a rhetorical question, but what would your funeral look like depending if it was just the amount of kids that you impacted while you were an educator? That's kind of mind blowing, but also kind of, it's humbling, but it's also very rewarding, depending on whoever's listening to this. If you were to ask yourself that question, like who would be there? How many kids would show up to your funeral based on how many people you had an impact on? And that's what we should be striving.
That should be the name of a chapter in your book. Like food for thought, and maybe like one of the last chapters, because it's like you said, it's a little like that is something to think about. And
it's just a visual. That's all it is. No one's ever really going to gauge your success as a teacher by that. But if you at least think about it, it may spark someone's, wow, I'd have 10, or I've had 30, or I'd have 1. Well, maybe that gives them an opportunity to self-reflect and introspectively look at how they approach their world of education. And like I've asked everybody on these podcasts, what's your why? Why do you teach? So maybe it gives somebody that's listening a visual, and maybe just a different perspective on what our job here is in education. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's really good. So we have all these walkthroughs, right? Admin comes in and whatnot. And aside from what they have to do, if you were to go into someone's classroom on this campus or any campus, what would make a teacher amazing in your eyes?
If they're up, and so that looks a little different this year, right? Like I'm a pacer. Sure. I like to move around the room. I walk around. So this year I've tried to stay in my little square that I've made. And I know that because of, again, this year's a little bit different. So little grain of salt, but is the teacher up and talking and engaged? And of course there's the students doing their practice. So there are times when you're taking attendance, they're going to be at your computer. I understand that. But if I'm sitting in your classroom for 30 to 45 minutes, I want to see you interacting with students. I want to hear their names. I want to see you walking around. And again, I know that's a little different, but at least maybe in the front of the classroom, just talking, engaging. And like, are the kids also, even if they're not talking, are they listening, or are they just on their headphones and on their phone?
Right.
So to me, that says a lot about a classroom. And this sounds, I know, depending on who's listening to this, if the objective's on the board, that doesn't tell me what kind of teacher you are. Right. The worst teachers may have the objective on the board. The best teachers may not. So I look to see what's happening. Like, are you connecting to the students? Right. Or are you ignoring them and they're ignoring you? I don't know.
And by that standard, I'm glad you said that. And I don't shy away from this, but by that standard, I would be a bad teacher. I don't post my objective, but I can guarantee you, if you ask my kids what we're doing today and tomorrow, they could probably tell you what we're doing today, because I told them the day before. I always tell my kids what to expect. Right. But unfortunately, when we're, dinged for not putting objectives on the boards, come observe me any day. Yeah. Come observe me. You know what I mean? So we can check all the boxes, but and I know that doesn't really mean anything. So
yeah. Well, like to that point though, if you like say like, hey, do you know what you're doing? I do like when I see when an admin comes in and they'll say, so what are you doing? And the kid can tell them, you're kind of listening and you're like, yes, okay. Like they got it. Like, even if it's not on the board, they're like, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. And that,
Yep, absolutely. All right. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges that we have in education? And do you think that we as a staff are put in position to help each other with that?
So I think the biggest challenge in education across the board, whether you're in Texas or Washington State, Maryland, is of course funding, which goes directly to, which everyone can say, but are the size of our classes. You're giving me 45 minutes with 35 kids, and you want me to basically perform miracles with, and let's just pretend there's no COVID. That's just with before pandemic.
Right.
And so I don't think a 10-person class is appropriate either, but there is a good number, and there is research to show, like 22 to 28 students really is that optimal number, at least at our level.
Right.
And so I definitely more funding to hire more teachers, but also counselors, because I mean, they have like 600 kids in our school, 600 kids per alpha.
Right.
And we have a testing coordinator, and we have, our college and career, we have all these people that help. But I know the school that I went to and smaller schools, they have one counselor to do everything,
Right.
scheduling, testing, everything. And yet the state and this country is like, you need to identify those that may be struggling mentally.
Right.
Okay, if that's going to be our job as teachers and counselors, you need to give us more training, and you need to give us help. Like, we need to have fewer students. So
Right.
I think if that's going to be our job, and I think we've mostly accepted that is now our job, is to also identify this, then we need more people so we can know the students better.
Yeah, I just had a conversation about that too. And we've kind of talked about a little bit here. If I can't connect to a kid, but you can, but if you and I don't ever have a conversation that we have and we share a common student, then you and I are not doing our jobs, right? I mean, if I'm having a hard time connecting to a kid, I should at least look in Texas Connect to see what other teachers this student has. And I'm sure you've received emails like that from other teachers. Hey, we all share this student. Do y'all know what's going on? Are they turning in work for you? So I get it. We do it, but I don't know if everyone does it. I also don't know if everyone has the vision and the foresight to see that there might be an, extenuating circumstance with that child too. But yeah, certainly more training to be there for these kids, because we're like the front line. Like, we see them every day. The counselors don't see them every day. And I think if we don't do our job as teachers to report that to the counselors either, they can't do their job, but then they're also overwhelmed with everything else they have to do. So if we can bridge that gap, that would certainly help. What do you do personally to improve, to become a better teacher?
So I'm constantly evaluating my lesson, like at the end of maybe not daily, but at the end of and not even the end of a unit, the end of a lesson and assignment, because usually it's over several days. How did it go? Maybe and already like, next time I'm going to do this differently. That worked really well, or that didn't. So always like those little evaluations. And whenever since I did traditional student teaching, whenever you had to submit like page or more, several pages, sometimes lesson plans for every single day, there was always that last piece, reflection, where you had to like do that. And so at the time I thought, oh, this is just like tedious and like unnecessary. Like, obviously you do that, but not everyone thinks to do that. And so I think that did help me always like evaluate this lesson, this unit. What can you do differently next time? You do it better next year, and that's all you can hope for. And then the year after that, you do it even better, until you are just the best at what you do. At the end of the year, I always do in most colleges, you have the end of the course survey, right? So I used to TA in college, and I would always read the surveys that they did. Since I was a TA, they would do them. And after you submitted grades, you got them, and they're anonymous, but I always read them because I wanted to see like what students had to say.
Right.
And so I still did that. I created one, and I've always done that ever since my first year of teaching. I have told the students, it's anonymous. I will not look at this until everything's done. It's summertime, like, be honest. And I've always gotten really good feedback. And the stuff that, like, if I see a trend, hey, this wasn't working, but I know it's what they need. Well, how can I address this differently? How can I teach it differently? And the one for English that I always liked is, it was always, I hated reading, or one of the questions, it's what's the best thing about this class? What's the worst thing? It's always when you make me read. But then later on it's, but I understand why we have to do it. So thank you for making me read.
Right. Yeah. Because they won't do it otherwise.
Right. Yeah. So they're like, I know it's good for me, but I still hate it, but we need it, and so they understand that.
So I don't know if I told you this or not, but I do public speaking, and I went out, and my presentation is, maybe it's not your students, maybe it's you, 25 reasons why you might suck as a teacher. And in my presentation at the very end, have you attended one of my presentations before? Okay. So at the very end of the presentation, actually, it's not at the end, it's at the beginning when I make the point of, if you want to know if you're a good teacher, ask your worst student. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people would shy away from that because they're afraid of what they're going to hear, but they're going to hear the truth. And if they hear the truth, they're either going to accept it or they're going to not accept it. And if they accept it, they're going to listen to it and change something about it, so they don't repeat that problem next year for those students, right? So I always will talk about this, but I've never done it before. I don't have an end of year survey like you do. So what I did that year, I actually put a camera in my skills lab, and they could volunteer themselves to go in there on camera, and they had to tell me one way that I spoke to them that helped them, and then one way that I sucked as a teacher. And I learned a lot. I humbly know that I am a good, effective teacher. I build relationships with kids, but we all have room for growth. And it was alarming to me what I heard on the negative side. It wasn't super negative, but I put my stress out there. And so when I was stressed out for whatever reason, whether it's about basketball, family life, school, overwhelmed with whatever, I stressed my kids out because they knew I was stressed. And so it stressed them out. And I'm like, how selfish of me to give them my stress like that. And so I've had to completely be aware of and tone down when I'm stressed. So I really like the idea that you do your survey. Well, to wrap things up here, I've got one last question. I always end every episode by giving you an opportunity to thank somebody on campus, a teacher or just somebody that you want to give them a shout out. So who would be that teacher and why?
So the list could be over 20 people, but I know I'm only going to do one. So, and I think that says something about our campus, that so many people want to thank so many people. I could walk down the hall and say, this person did this for me. This person's amazing. And when I show new teachers around, I do like to tell them hey, go to this person for this, go to this person for this. But the number one will have to be John Zimmerman. My first year here at Steele, I was put on a team with him, with others, but just, and I've heard this from other teachers too. And I'm really happy to hear that about Steele. Anything you need. Oh, you need a copy of this, or I did this last year. This is how I teach this. Let me share this file with you. And he's a sharer. He will give you anything he's made. He doesn't hide any of the things that he's doing. He'll listen. He listens. He's great to bounce ideas off of. And he's such a smart person. And we watch a lot of the same kind of obscure shows and things. So it's fun to have conversations like that. And then, so he's helped me build my media library for both when I taught English and now government economics. And he takes his own time at home to do that for me all the time, without ever complaining. And I always feel bad, bringing him media to convert for me. And he's just always, and gets it done the next day. I tell him, no rush, always the next day.
And it's done.
And then he brings it to me from across campus. And I tell him, I'll come get it. No, he brings it to me. So.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, shout out to you, Mr. Zimmerman. And I've heard that before. So if you're listening to this episode, and I hope you do, you might be next. So Ms. Barden, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to visit with me. And it's been a pleasure. It's been a kind of a weird situation where we've had to split up this podcast. So there's always a first for that, but I sincerely thank you for spending time with me.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Take care. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Keeping Up with the Knights. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure you subscribe and click the notification button so you know when the next episode is released, and then share it with your friends and colleagues. If you're so inclined to do so, would you please rate and review this podcast to help me grow our community of listeners? I hope there was something that you heard today that allowed you to connect outside the classroom. Now, more than ever, we need each other as a support system, and we need to continue to make this the best high school in the state of Texas. Thank you, Knight Nation. Now, go be someone's champion today.